Okay, we're gonna make the mesh tote. We have two different sizes of mesh totes. We have a large tote and a small tote. This is the material for the large totes. You're gonna need your pet mesh. You can get this at Home Depot, Lowe's, or Walmart. You're gonna need a fat quarter and some interfacing batting that's got the iron-on side to it, and your webbing. So the first thing we're going to do after we cut all of our fabrics and mesh out is we're going to fuse a piece of the 6x18 material to a piece of batting. So you're going to fuse two 6x18 strips of fabric to the batting, and I just want to remind everybody not to iron on the batting side. It will melt the batting. This is not 100% cotton, and your iron will melt the batting and make a big mess on your iron. So make sure when you iron this on, I know you all know this, but sometimes we get in a hurry and just go and do, but make sure you iron the fabric side when you're fusing your batting and your fabric together. You're going to do this with two strips, one for each pocket on each side of the tote. Now that we've fused our batting to our fabric, we're going to sew our lining piece to our fused piece. And you're going to notice in the instructions where it says top stitch 1/4 inch from the top edge of both sets. You only need to do this if you use cotton batting that is not fusible. So you don't need to quilt this. So if you see the instructions and you see this part right here, this has technically already been done for you since it's a fusible batting. So we're gonna go to this step right here, and we're gonna sew A and B together, which is your batting piece and then your lining piece. And we're gonna sew a 1/4 inch seam, and we're gonna turn it right sides out and press. Okay, I've sewn my two pieces together, and I'm gonna press now just all the way down, still not ironing on that batting side because I don't want to melt that batting. And we're just gonna give it a good press, and I'm gonna turn this to where it folds over like that, and I'll give it another good press, and we will have one pocket. Okay, now that our pockets are sewn together and fused with batting, we're going to take our mesh and we're going to fold it in half. Now this is where the directions can be a little bit confusing. I remember the first time I made a mesh tote, it took me several tries to get the pockets right. So we're going to fold it in half, and I'm going to show you how to place your pockets. We're not going to follow the instructions step by step here because these mesh totes are cut to a different size than what we're used to. So I'm going to show you how we're going to figure out how to place our pocket on these mesh totes. And this is for this project only. When we do these mesh totes in the future, they may actually be to the size of the instructions, and there's another way to figure it out there. But I'm going to show you how to do it to this size. This piece of mesh is about 27 3/4 inches, and so we're going to fold our mesh in half, and I'm going to show you how to figure out the placing of your pockets. Now the bottom of our tote is going to measure 6 inches, and that is the very bottom of the tote that would sit on the floor or on a table. So since our fabric is folded in half, we're going to measure 3 inches from the bottom edge, this bottom folded edge, 3 inches from the fold, and I'm going to straighten this up, and I'm going to take a piece of chalk and I'm going to put a little mark right here at 3 inches. And the reason I'm using chalk is because it'll wipe off with your hands or a damp rag. So there's my mark at 3 inches. Now what I want to do is I want to line up this rough edge, this open edge of my pocket to this line mark. And I'm going to sew We're gonna make sure it's straight, 3 inches on both sides. And I'm gonna sew across here, and that's gonna be one of my pockets. And we're gonna do this to both pockets on each side of the mesh. And when we finish sewing, I'm gonna show you how we need to press that seam line. Now that my pockets are pinned on, I just want to show you that this is the open edge of the mesh. Down here underneath my pocket is the folded edge. I like to pin mine at the same time so that I can ensure my pockets line up, because when you sew the seam of this edge, we want those pockets to kind of line up together. If they're a little bit off, it's okay, but we really want them to look neat and the seam of the pockets together and aligned with each other on each side. I'm going to give you a tip to sewing this if you have a small sewing machine like I do. So let's go sew our pocket on. Okay, when you open your mesh back up and you get ready to sew your pockets on, your pockets are going to overlap a little. And so to keep one pocket from getting sewn to the other one, I just fold it back and I clip it, and that's going to keep it out of the way. Now I'm going to show you what to do to make it easier to get through your sewing machine. If you have a small sewing machine like I do, I don't have a lot of space from here to here. So all of this mesh up underneath here is not fun or ideal, but I'm going to show you what I do. Okay, so here's a little pro tip to keep this mesh from getting in your way underneath your sewing machine. I roll it up and I clip it with one of our neat little clippies, and then that way it doesn't get in my way. And if it does have to fold up a little bit more, it'll just naturally roll to the side like that. This is the edge I'm going to sew on one pocket, and so all of this will go in to this right here, but it won't bunch up or get in the way or anything like that, which is helpful. So we're going to sew along this edge and secure our first pocket, and then we're going to come back and we're going to sew this one, and then we're going to press these in the upright position on our mesh. Okay, I had the wrong edge rolled up, so I fixed it. I rolled the right edge up, and I've put my fabric in here, and I'm going to do a little bit more than a 1/4 inch seam, just because I want to make sure that both edges of this fabric get caught in this stitch. I'm going to use a zigzag stitch. I just think that sometimes it gives it more stability, and when you think in terms of moms shoving things down in pockets like big sippy cups and stuff like that, I just think it'll make it a little bit stronger. So I use a zigzag stitch, and I like to use sort of a bigger stitch. I use about 3.5 in my length, and I'm going to sew all the way down on both pockets, and then we're going to press that seam. Okay, when we press these seams, we want to be really careful not to touch our iron on the mesh. It will melt the mesh. So we're just going to stay on top of this fabric, and we're just going to press it really good back and forth a couple of times, and that should suffice. There's one pocket. Here's the other pocket. We're going to press it really good. You'll have to forgive my left-handedness and the cord in the way, but we're going to stay on top of that fabric, and we're not going to touch that mesh with our iron. All right, now that we have our pocket sewn onto our mesh, we're going to start working on the trim. You're going to have 2 strips of fabric that are 4 by 18 inches long. And what you're going to do is you're going to fold this strip in half, wrong sides together, and press it. Now that my strip is pressed in half, I'm going to take my ruler or my measuring tape, and I'm going to measure 3/8 of an inch all the way across, and I'm going to use on the right side of the fabric, this is how I do it, I'm going to use my heat friction pin. Now I realize not all of us will have a heat friction pin at home, but basically you need a 3/8 of a fold under at this edge of the strip. But I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to measure out 3/8 of an inch, and I'm going to make a line all the way across, and then I'm going to fold and press to that line. Now that my strip of fabric is neatly pressed, I'm going to pin it to my mesh at the top edge of the mesh. I've got my strip clipped to my mesh, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam on the bottom all the way across, leaving these ends open. When we're sewing our top edge, we want to make sure that we take our time and sew an even seam because this is going to be seen. I'm using a black thread, so it's going to stand out against this orangey brown color, but you could use a thread that would blend in better with your fabric. But if you're going to use sort of a coordinating color, when you do this top stitch on this strip, make sure you're really neat and that it's, you know, it's not crooked or swerving all over the place, because we want it to be a good quality bag. Okay, so once we get our edge trim sewed on and our pocket sewed on, our mesh is going to look like this. It's unfolded, laying flat, and the next step is to put your handles on. And you're probably wondering why we haven't secured these yet. The way we put the handles on is actually going to secure these for us. So you need 3 yards of the 1-inch webbing. Thankfully, I think last year Julie made this really awesome diagram about how we put on our strap. This is our mesh piece. Here's one pocket, here's the other pocket, and our 2 edge. This line right here is our entire piece of webbing, and the way we put it on is so that the end will line up on the bottom of our tote together. So we're going to follow the instructions. So I'm going to measure 2.5 inches in, and I'm going to put my mesh in the middle of the bottom, and I'm going to pin. I'm not going to center my mesh in the 2.5 inches. I'm just going to lay my ruler down and then pin it on the edge of my ruler. Okay, after I get one side pinned down, I'm going to actually turn it over, and the best to my ability with one hand, I'm going to fold it in half again and make sure it's lined up. And I'm going to pull these straps that are, oh goodness, this may not work one-handed, y'all. I'm going to pull these straps up here even, and I'm going to secure it at the top so that my straps are the same length. Now that our straps are pinned down to the bag, I'm going to go sew. I like to sew on each side of the strap just to give it a little bit more security. But we're going to sew down this line and stop, and down this line and stop. Make sure you back stitch at each end so that your thread doesn't come unraveled. And then I will show you how to close the sides of the bag. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is sew our sides together. Okay, now that our sides are sewn and trimmed up, we're going to take this bias tape and we're going to put it on our sides to keep the mesh from messing stuff up that we may put in our bags later on. This is just black bias tape that I made from black fabric, but you can buy bias tape or binding tape at Walmart just the same. Once we get our bias tape sewn to our sides, we will be at the part in the instructions where it says the bottom of the tote. Sorry about the shadow. And I cannot do this one-handed, so I'm going to set my phone down and fix the bag in the way that the instructions are telling you to do it. It says measure 3 inches down from the bottom, but all of our totes come out different sizes, so I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. Okay, so we've kind of laid our bag out like this to make a point. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to sew 3 inches because this is a little shy of 3 inches, but I'm going to sew just under where the pocket falls all the way across, and this is going to create the bottom to our tote. And I'm going to do it on both corners. Once your corners are sewn, you flip your bag right side out and your mesh tote is finished. Now we will get all of these completed, and I'm going to take them to somebody who is going to, in the bottom, it may be on the directions, But in the bottom, you put a piece of foam board or cardboard to make the bottom sturdy. And I just leave my corners, I don't cut my corners off. I just leave them like that. They just neatly fold down, and then we'll put that foam board on top, and that'll give a bottom to our mesh tote. But there it is.